The wind howled across the barren landscape, carrying dust and echoes of the distant storm. Commander Ethan Reed pulled his tattered jacket tighter, squinting against the orange horizon. His ship lay in ruins a mile behind him, smoke rising lazily into the alien sky. "Great, just perfect," Ethan muttered, kicking the small rock. He had survived worse, but being stranded on an unknown planet with no communication, that was new. His comms device crackled but remained stubbornly silent. As he climbed over a jagged rock formation, the land dipped into a shallow valley. Strange, twisted trees stretched toward the sky like skeletal fingers. It was eerie, but Ethan pressed on. He needed to find shelter before nightfall. Then he heard it. "Help me. Behind you." Ethan froze. The voice was faint, raspy, and it wasn't coming from his earpiece. Slowly, he turned. His pulse quickened as his eyes scanned the area. "Hello," he called, hand instinctively hovering over his belt, though he had no weapon left. "Who's there?" Silence. Ethan frowned. Maybe he was hearing things, effects of dehydration or stress. But as he took another step forward, the voice returned. "Human, please, behind you." He spun around, heart pounding. There, half buried beneath a collapsed metal structure, was something that shimmered unnaturally in the dim light. A figure. Ethan hesitated, unsure whether to approach. The creature's body shifted slightly, revealing iridescent skin that rippled like liquid under the sunlight. It wasn't human. "Please," the alien gasped, its eyes barely visible beneath the rubble. I can't move." Ethan crouched down, keeping a cautious distance. "What are you?" he asked. "I am Zoltrak," the alien replied weakly. "Help me, and I will serve you for life." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Serve me?" The alien winced in pain. "A vow. Of my people. A life debt." Ethan exhaled, rubbing his forehead. The last thing he needed was an alien promising lifelong service. He wasn't even sure he'd survive the next day. But leaving this creature to die didn't sit right with him. "All right," Ethan muttered, pulling a small rod from his belt. "Don't move." Zoltrak chuckled weakly. "I can't." Ethan jabbed the rod into a crack in the metal, using it as leverage to pry the heavy debris off Zoltrak's lower body. It took several attempts, his muscles straining with each effort. Finally, with one hard push, the structure shifted just enough for Zoltrak to crawl out. The alien collapsed onto the ground, breathing heavily. "Thank you," Zoltrak whispered. Ethan wiped sweat from his brow. "Don't thank me yet. I think we just woke up half the planet." A low rumble echoed in the distance. Ethan turned, eyes narrowing toward the horizon. Dark silhouettes moved far away, but they were closing in, fast. Zoltrak stiffened, his eyes wide. "We need to leave. Now." "What are those things?" Ethan asked, gripping Zoltrak's arm to help him up. "Hunters," Zoltrak replied urgently. "They've been tracking me for days." "Fantastic," Ethan muttered. "I save you, and now I'm part of the chase." Zoltrak's glowing skin dimmed slightly as he leaned heavily against Ethan. "I will not forget this. I will repay you." Ethan glanced at him. "How about you help me get off this rock?" "That'll do." They began moving quickly, but the uneven terrain slowed them down. The hunter's growls grew louder, echoing across the valley. Ethan gritted his teeth. "I hope you have more tricks up your sleeve, Zoltrak." The alien managed a faint smile. "Perhaps, but first, we survive." The chase was just beginning. Ethan's boots crunched over brittle stone as he half-carried, half-dragged Zoltrak through the uneven terrain. The alien's weight wasn't much, surprisingly light for someone his size, but the constant glancing over his shoulder and the distant, guttural growls made every step heavier. "I'd ask what those things are," Ethan grunted, "but I feel like I won't like the answer." Zoltrak coughed weakly, but his eyes flickered with faint amusement. "Shadow stalkers," he rasped. "Fast. Strong. Merciless. Ethan winced. Yeah, definitely didn't like the answer. Behind them, the silhouettes of the predators darted across the rocky ridges, their movements fluid like smoke twisting through the air. Ethan didn't need binoculars to tell they were getting closer. Zoltrak tugged at Ethan's arm, pulling him toward a narrow path between two jagged rock walls. This way. It leads to the canyon. They can't surround us there. Ethan followed without argument. The wind shifted as they moved, and the valley felt colder, the air thinner. "You're sure about this?" Ethan asked, keeping his voice low. Zoltrak nodded, but Ethan didn't miss the way his glowing skin flickered, as if his strength was fading with every step. "How long have you been out here?" Ethan asked, curiosity slipping into his words despite their situation. 3 days, Zoltrak replied. "Maybe more. Time feels different here." Ethan frowned. "And those things have been after you the whole time?" "Yes," Zoltrak said softly. "They can smell weakness. I was injured when I crashed. They have not left me alone since." Ethan didn't press further. Survival first. Questions later. The narrow path opened into a canyon just as Zoltrak had promised. Towering cliffs stretched on both sides, casting long shadows over the cracked ground. Ethan set Zoltrak down against a smooth slab of stone and knelt beside him. "You rest. I'll keep watch." Zoltrak exhaled heavily, slumping against the rock. His body shimmered faintly in the dim light. Ethan glanced up at the canyon walls. There wasn't much to work with. No real cover, no vantage point. If those things found them here, there'd be no running. As if reading his thoughts, Zoltrak spoke up. "They won't follow us too far in. They fear tight spaces." "That right?" Ethan asked, raising an eyebrow. Zoltrak nodded. "But if they are desperate enough, they may risk it." Ethan didn't like the sound of that. He leaned back, watching the canyon entrance as the shadows grew longer. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the occasional gust of wind. After a long pause, Zoltrak broke the quiet. "Why did you save me, human?" Ethan shrugged. "Couldn't just leave you there." Zoltrak's eyes narrowed slightly. "Many would have." Ethan smirked. "Guess I'm not many." Zoltrak chuckled faintly, but his expression grew more serious. "My people do not often receive kindness from humans." Ethan crossed his arms, leaning against the stone. "Well, your people haven't met me." Before Zoltrak could respond, a low growl rumbled from the entrance of the canyon. Ethan tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife strapped to his boot, the only weapon he had left. Zoltrak stiffened, his glowing skin dimming further. "They've come." Ethan rose slowly, positioning himself between the entrance and Zoltrak. The shadowy figures loomed at the canyon's mouth, their glowing red eyes piercing the dark. Ethan tightened his grip on the knife. "Got any more tricks, Zoltrak?" The alien shifted slightly but looked weaker than ever. "Not enough to fight them all." Ethan's heart pounded as the creatures crept closer, their claws clicking against the stone. "Then let's hope bluffing works," Ethan muttered. He stepped forward, raising his arms wide and letting out a fierce, guttural shout that echoed through the canyon. The predators halted, their heads tilting in unison. Ethan stood his ground, staring them down. "Humans are dangerous," Zoltrak whispered from behind him. "You could use that." Ethan grinned faintly, not taking his eyes off the creatures. "Let's hope they believe that." The shadow stalkers circled just beyond the canyon entrance, snarling but unwilling to advance. Their red eyes glowed in the darkness, but none crossed the threshold. After several tense moments, the creatures finally slinked back into the shadows, disappearing into the valley beyond. Ethan exhaled slowly. "That actually worked," he said, lowering his arms. Zoltrak let out a soft laugh, though it sounded strained. "Perhaps I was right to trust you, human." Ethan turned back, kneeling beside him. "Yeah, well, let's not push our luck." Zoltrak nodded, his glowing skin flickering softly in the fading light. The predators might have retreated for now, but Ethan knew this wasn't over. Far from it. The canyon walls pressed in on either side, and the air felt heavier the deeper they went. Ethan's footsteps echoed softly against the cracked stone, but Zoltrak's breathing was louder, shallow and labored. The alien's glowing skin had faded to a dull shimmer, barely visible in the dim light. "You okay back there?" Ethan asked without turning around. "I will survive," Zoltrak replied, but his voice carried little conviction. Ethan slowed his pace, casting a glance over his shoulder. Zoltrak's steps were unsteady, and he leaned heavily against the canyon wall as they moved forward. Ethan sighed and stopped. "All right, we take 5. Zoltrak looked like he wanted to argue, but the exhaustion in his eyes spoke louder than words. He slumped against the rock, sinking to the ground. Ethan knelt beside him, rummaging through his tattered pack. "I don't have much, but here." He tossed Zoltrak a canteen with the last of his water. Zoltrak hesitated. "You need this to survive." "I'll find more," Ethan said flatly. "Drink." Zoltrak finally relented, sipping slowly. As he handed the canteen back, his gaze softened. "You're kind. You are not what I expected." Ethan smirked. Humans surprise a lot of people. For a brief moment, silence settled between them, but it didn't last. A sharp clicking sound echoed from behind, faint but distinct. Ethan's hand shot to his knife. Zoltrak's eyes narrowed. "They followed us." Ethan scanned the canyon's entrance, but nothing moved. The clicking faded, replaced by the soft rustling of wind. Still, Ethan didn't lower his guard. "They're watching," Ethan said, tightening his grip. "Yes," Zoltrak agreed. "They won't attack here. Not yet." Ethan frowned. "Why not?" Zoltrak hesitated before answering. "They wait for weakness. For fear." Ethan glanced at him. "They'll be waiting a long time, then." Zoltrak smiled faintly, but the moment was short-lived. A sudden tremor shook the ground beneath them. Dust and small rocks cascaded from the cliffs overhead. Ethan stood quickly, eyes narrowing at the canyon ahead. "What now?" Zoltrak pushed himself up with difficulty. "We need to move. Quickly." Ethan didn't ask questions. He slung Zoltrak's arm over his shoulder and picked up the pace. As they advanced, the canyon began to widen. The open sky appeared ahead, but the ground sloped downward into a rocky field littered with jagged stones and twisted debris. Ethan's instincts screamed danger. "This looks like a trap," he muttered. Zoltrak's glowing skin pulsed faintly. "It might be our only way forward." Ethan exhaled sharply, but pressed on. The field stretched for half a mile, but something felt off. The wind was too still, the air too quiet. Halfway across, Zoltrak stiffened. "They're here," he whispered. Ethan froze. From the corner of his eye, he caught the flicker of movement, shadowy figures darting between the rocks, their glowing red eyes flickering like embers in the dark. "Keep moving," Ethan urged, gripping Zoltrak tighter. The predators didn't charge. They stalked, keeping their distance, but circling like wolves around prey. "They're waiting for something," Ethan murmured. Zoltrak's breathing quickened. "They want us to run." Ethan stopped dead in his tracks. The creatures inched closer, their eyes burning with hunger. Ethan knelt beside Zoltrak. "Can you walk on your own for a minute?" Zoltrak nodded weakly. Ethan stood tall, raising his knife high enough for the predators to see. "Come on then," he growled. "Let's get this over with." The creatures hesitated. Zoltrak's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" "Testing a theory," Ethan said without looking away from the circling shadows. He took a slow step forward, shoulders squared. The predators snarled but didn't charge. Another step. Another growl. "They respect strength," Ethan whispered. "If we show fear, we're dead." Zoltrak's faint smile returned. "You are a strange human. I get that a lot." Ethan kept walking, blade in hand, eyes locked with the nearest predator. The creatures continued circling, but none dared attack. Step by step, they crossed the field. The canyon mouth loomed ahead, and the predators began to fall back into the shadows. Ethan didn't lower his knife until the last of the red eyes disappeared behind them. As they entered the new canyon, Zoltrak collapsed against a boulder, gasping for air. Ethan knelt beside him, patting his shoulder. "Told you bluffing works." Zoltrak chuckled weakly. "You bluffed your way through shadow stalkers. I think I owe you more than just my life." Ethan grinned. "One life debt's enough, thanks." But even as the danger faded, Ethan's gaze lingered on the dark canyon behind them. The predators were gone, for now. But something told him this wasn't the last time they'd cross paths. The canyon stretched endlessly, the walls towering like jagged teeth on either side. The narrow path twisted and turned, giving no clear sign of where it led, or if it led anywhere at all. Ethan glanced at Zoltrak, who staggered beside him, his shimmering skin flickering dimly with every step. The alien's strength was fading. "We need to stop soon," Ethan said. "You look like you're about to fall over." Zoltrak shook his head weakly. "Not yet. The stalkers won't give up so easily. We must put more distance between us." Ethan frowned but didn't argue. He had seen those creatures too closely to believe they'd simply lose interest. Still, the weight of exhaustion pressed down on both of them. And as they rounded a sharp bend in the canyon, Ethan spotted a small alcove tucked into the rock face. It wasn't much, but it was enough. "Here," Ethan said, guiding Zoltrak toward the narrow space. "Rest for a minute. I'll keep watch." Zoltrak slumped against the wall, his breathing shallow. The glow of his skin dimmed further, barely more than a faint pulse beneath the surface. Ethan crouched nearby, gripping his knife loosely as his eyes scanned the canyon entrance. Silence stretched between them, but the weight of unspoken words hung thick in the air. Finally, Zoltrak broke the quiet. "You are different from the humans I've encountered before." Ethan raised an eyebrow, but didn't look away from the canyon. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It was meant to be," Zoltrak replied softly. "Most humans see my kind as inferior, enemies, even." Ethan shrugged. "I don't see an enemy, just someone trying to survive." Zoltrak's gaze lingered on him for a long moment. "Survival makes allies of strangers, I suppose." Ethan smirked faintly. "Funny how that works." But before either of them could say more, a faint humming sound echoed through the canyon. Ethan's grip on his knife tightened. Zoltrak's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "That sound. It's not the stalkers." Ethan rose slowly, scanning the walls. "Then what is it?" Zoltrak's expression darkened. "Hunters." Ethan's stomach twisted. "Let me guess. They're not here to help." "No," Zoltrak said grimly. "They're here for me." Ethan cursed under his breath. "Why?" Zoltrak hesitated, his glowing skin flickering nervously. "Because of this." He reached inside a hidden compartment on his suit, drawing out a small crystalline device that pulsed faintly with blue light. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "I'm guessing that's not just a fancy flashlight." "It is a key," Zoltrak admitted. "A powerful artifact. One that could shift the balance of power in this galaxy." Ethan exhaled sharply. "Of course it is. And now we've got hunters after us because of it." Zoltrak's gaze hardened. "I did not intend to drag you into this. But if they catch us, they will not spare you." Ethan grinned faintly, rolling his shoulders. "Well, that's good to know. At least I'm not bored." Zoltrak gave him a strange look. "You face danger too casually." Ethan shrugged. "I've been through worse." Before Zoltrak could respond, the humming grew louder. Ethan pressed himself against the rock wall, peering down the canyon. Two figures emerged, tall, armored, and carrying sleek rifles that hummed softly with energy. Ethan whispered, "Friends of yours?" Zoltrak's expression darkened. "No, they are bounty hunters. Mercenaries paid to retrieve the artifact by any means. Ethan tightened his grip on his knife. Great. Any ideas? Zoltrak's eyes darted around the narrow alcove. We could ambush them, but we'd have little chance of success. Ethan grinned faintly. Then we make them ambush us instead. Zoltrak's brow furrowed. I do not follow. Ethan crouched lower, motioning for Zoltrak to stay hidden. Let them think we're weak. When they get close, we strike. Zoltrak hesitated, but eventually nodded. The bounty hunters approached slowly, their helmets scanning the area. One of them spoke, his voice distorted through his helmet speaker. We know you're here, Zoltrak. Hand over the artifact, and we'll let you live. Ethan whispered, They're bluffing. Zoltrak tensed. I know. The second bounty hunter took another step forward. You have until the count of 3. Ethan's muscles coiled. He waited. 1. Ethan's heart pounded. 2. The moment the second number left the hunter's lips, Ethan burst from the alcove, knife flashing in the dim light. He moved fast, slamming into the first bounty hunter and driving the blade into the gap between his armor plates. The hunter cried out, staggering backward. Zoltrak followed, raising his hand. A faint pulse of energy rippled from his palm, striking the second hunter and knocking him off his feet. Ethan twisted the knife free and drove it down again. The bounty hunter collapsed, unmoving. The second hunter scrambled to his feet, but Zoltrak stepped forward, placing a hand on his helmet. Zoltrak's glowing skin pulsed brightly, and the hunter's body stiffened. When Zoltrak removed his hand, the hunter collapsed unconscious. Ethan wiped his blade on his jacket, glancing at Zoltrak. Not bad for someone who can barely stand. Zoltrak swayed slightly but smiled faintly. I repay my debts. Ethan nodded, stepping over the fallen hunters. We should keep moving, Ethan said. If they found us this easily, more will come. Zoltrak tucked the artifact back into his suit. Agreed. As they disappeared deeper into the canyon, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Ethan's boots scraped against the rocky ground as they trudged deeper into the canyon. The bounty hunters lay motionless behind them, but Ethan's mind stayed sharp, replaying the fight over and over. Something about it didn't sit right. They found us too fast, Ethan muttered. Zoltrak, still pale and leaning heavily against the canyon wall, gave a faint nod. Yes, they were tracking the artifact. But Ethan slowed his pace and glanced sideways at him. But what? Zoltrak's gaze flickered toward the path behind them, his glowing skin dimming as if in shame. There may be another reason. Ethan's eyes narrowed. What aren't you telling me? Zoltrak hesitated, his glowing skin flickering erratically. Finally, he exhaled, as if the weight of the truth was too heavy to carry any longer. Before I crashed, I sent a signal. A distress beacon. Ethan stopped walking. You what? I thought I would die if I didn't. The beacon carried my location, and the location of the artifact. Ethan's jaw clenched, and he turned fully to face Zoltrak. So you didn't just crash here by accident. You led them right to you. Zoltrak avoided his gaze. I did not expect company. Ethan let out a sharp breath, raking a hand through his hair. You should have told me this sooner. I feared you would leave me behind, Zoltrak admitted quietly. Ethan stared at him for a long moment, the tension hanging like a blade between them. Finally, Ethan shook his head, sheathing his knife. Next time, don't lie to the guy keeping you alive. Zoltrak gave a faint, almost guilty nod. Understood. They pressed on, the narrow canyon gradually widening into a vast plateau of jagged rocks and pale cliffs. In the distance, the faint outline of wreckage shimmered against the horizon. Zoltrak's ship. Ethan's eyes narrowed. That your ride? Yes, Zoltrak said softly. Or what's left of it? Ethan adjusted his grip on his pack. Good. If there's a transmitter still working in there, maybe I can call for help. But Zoltrak's expression darkened. "I doubt we'll be alone for long." Ethan followed his gaze to the far ridge, where faint silhouettes appeared, moving with purpose. "More hunters." "Great," Ethan muttered. "How many people want this artifact?" "Enough to wage war over it," Zoltrak replied grimly. Ethan exhaled sharply. "Well, I'm not in the mood for war. Come on." They descended the rocky slope toward the wreck, the rusted frame of Zoltrak's ship creaking in the wind. As they neared the entrance, Ethan slowed, scanning the area. "Something's wrong," he whispered. Zoltrak tensed beside him. "I feel it too." Ethan knelt, brushing his hand against the sand. Small tracks, too small to belong to the bounty hunters, circled the wreck. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Not just hunters. Someone else has been here." Zoltrak's skin flared with a faint glow. "I know who." Before Ethan could respond, a voice echoed from the shadows of the ship. Well, you've taken longer than expected, Zoltrak." Ethan's hand shot to his knife, but the figure that emerged wasn't armed. She was tall, with sleek silver armor and pale violet skin. Her eyes glowed faintly, much like Zoltrak's, but colder. Zoltrak's expression darkened. "Lyra." Ethan glanced between them. "I'm guessing you two know each other." Lyra's gaze flicked toward Ethan. "You could say that. I am his sister." Ethan's eyebrows shot up. "You didn't think to mention that either." Zoltrak's shoulders stiffened, his glow pulsing erratically. "It is complicated." Ethan folded his arms. "I'm starting to think everything about you is complicated." Lyra took a step closer, ignoring Ethan. "The artifact, Zoltrak. Hand it over." "No," Zoltrak said firmly. Lyra's eyes narrowed. "You would betray your own people to protect them." She gestured toward Ethan dismissively. "I swore a life debt," Zoltrak replied. "And I intend to honor it." Ethan leaned casually against a rock. "I feel like I should be flattered, but I'm too busy wondering if I'm about to get shot." Lyra's gaze sharpened. "Perhaps. Unless Zoltrak sees reason." Zoltrak's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. "I will not give it to you." Lyra sighed, as if she had anticipated his response. "You always were stubborn." She raised her hand, and from the shadows, more figures emerged. 6 heavily armed soldiers, their rifles trained on Ethan and Zoltrak. Ethan glanced at Zoltrak. "I really hope you have a plan." Zoltrak's glow brightened slightly. "Yes, but it will not be easy." Ethan smirked. "Nothing ever is." Lyra's voice hardened. "Last chance, brother. The artifact, or your life." Zoltrak stepped forward, shielding Ethan. "I choose neither." Before Lyra could react, Zoltrak raised his hand, and a pulse of bright energy erupted from his palm, blinding the soldiers. "Run!" Zoltrak shouted. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed Zoltrak's arm, dragging him toward the ship's wreckage as gunfire erupted behind them. The canyon echoed with the sharp crack of energy blasts. They dove into the wreck just as bullets ricocheted off the metal walls. Ethan crouched behind a console, heart pounding. "Your family has terrible timing," Ethan grumbled. Zoltrak smiled faintly. "It runs in the blood." Ethan peeked out of the wreckage, watching Lyra's soldiers fan out. "This isn't over," he muttered. Zoltrak's eyes glowed brightly once more. "No, it's not." The crackle of gunfire echoed through the ship's twisted remains as Ethan crouched low, pressing his back against the cold metal. Zoltrak slumped beside him, his breathing shallow, the glow beneath his skin flickering like a candle in the wind. Outside, Lyra's soldiers advanced carefully, their rifles humming with restrained power. Ethan's grip tightened around his knife. It wasn't much against energy weapons, but he wasn't planning to go down without a fight. "You know," Ethan whispered, "when you said things were complicated, I didn't expect this." Zoltrak managed a weak chuckle. "I warned you." Ethan peeked over the edge of the console they were hiding behind. The soldiers moved with precision, spreading out to cover all possible exits. Lyra stood at the edge of the wreckage, arms crossed, watching patiently. "She's not rushing this," Ethan said. "She knows we're trapped." "Yes," Zoltrak replied, his eyes dimming further. "She is patient." Ethan frowned, noticing how pale Zoltrak had become. The alien was barely holding on. "Hey," Ethan nudged him. "Stay with me. We'll get out of this." Zoltrak's head tilted slightly, but his gaze was distant. "No, you will." Ethan's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" Zoltrak shifted painfully, reaching into the compartment on his chest, where the artifact lay hidden. He withdrew the crystalline device and held it out to Ethan. Ethan stared at it. "No. I know where this is going. Keep it." "You must take it," Zoltrak insisted, pushing the artifact toward him. "If I stay behind, I can buy you time." Ethan's eyes hardened. "Not happening." Zoltrak's grip faltered, and the artifact nearly slipped from his hands. Ethan caught it instinctively, feeling the strange hum of energy beneath the surface. "You don't understand," Zoltrak whispered. "This artifact, it is bound to me. As long as I carry it, they will hunt me. But if you take it, you can escape." Ethan shook his head. "And leave you here to die? Not a chance." Zoltrak smiled faintly. "It is the way of my people. A life for a life. I owe you that." Ethan glared at him. "I didn't save you just to watch you throw yourself away." A sudden explosion rattled the ship as one of Lyra's soldiers lobbed a plasma grenade near the entrance. Metal screeched as the hull bent inward. Ethan gritted his teeth. Time was running out. "Fine," Ethan growled, tucking the artifact into his jacket. "But we both walk out of here. Got it?" Zoltrak's expression softened, but he said nothing. Ethan rose cautiously, keeping low as he moved toward the far end of the wreck. The rear thrusters had partially collapsed, but there was just enough space to squeeze through. "This way," Ethan whispered, motioning to Zoltrak. Zoltrak struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on Ethan as they slipped through the narrow gap. The open desert stretched out beyond the wreck, but Lyra's soldiers were closing in fast. Ethan's heart pounded. "We're not gonna outrun them like this." Zoltrak's hand trembled as he pulled something from his belt, a small spherical device no larger than a fist. He pressed a button, and the sphere began to glow faintly. "A flare?" Ethan asked, frowning. "A distress signal," Zoltrak corrected. "But not for my people. For yours." Ethan's eyes widened. "You've had that this whole time." Zoltrak nodded weakly. "I hoped it would not come to this." Ethan scanned the horizon. "How long until someone shows up?" "Minutes, maybe hours." "Not helpful," Ethan muttered. Behind them, Lyra's soldiers spotted movement and raised their rifles. "There," one of them shouted. Ethan cursed under his breath. "Looks like we're out of time." The soldiers advanced quickly, but Lyra called out from the wreckage. "Stand down," she commanded, her voice cold but calm. "Zoltrak, don't make this harder than it needs to be." Ethan helped Zoltrak lower himself against a rock, then stood in front of him, knife in hand. "I've been told I'm very good at making things harder," Ethan called back. Lyra's gaze settled on him. "I don't know who you are, human, but this doesn't concern you. Walk away, and I'll spare your life." Ethan smirked. "Yeah, that's not happening." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "You cannot protect him. You're outnumbered, outgunned." Ethan's grip on his knife tightened, but before he could respond, a low rumble echoed across the desert sky. Lyra's gaze shifted upward, and Ethan followed her line of sight. A sleek, angular human dropship descended rapidly, kicking up a storm of dust as it neared the ground. "Guess your signal worked faster than expected," Ethan muttered. Zoltrak's lips curved into a faint smile. The dropship's hatch hissed open, and armored figures spilled out, rifles raised. Lyra scowled, signaling her soldiers to fall back. "This isn't over, brother," she said, glaring at Zoltrak. You cannot run forever. Zoltrak's gaze met hers, calm and resolute. I won't need to. Lyra turned sharply, disappearing into the desert shadows with her soldiers. As the dust settled, Ethan knelt beside Zoltrak. You all right? Zoltrak exhaled slowly. I will be. Ethan patted his shoulder. Good, because next time you drag me into a family feud, I expect a better reward than glowing rocks. Zoltrak chuckled softly. Perhaps next time. I will offer dinner instead. Ethan grinned. Deal. As the dropship lifted off, Ethan glanced one last time at the desert below. It wasn't over, but for now, they had survived. The dropship hummed softly as it cut through the alien sky, its engines leaving faint trails in the thin atmosphere. Ethan leaned against the cold metal wall inside the cabin, watching the desert below fade into the distance. Across from him, Zoltrak sat quietly, his glowing skin dim but steady, as if the pulse of his life force was beginning to stabilize. Not exactly the family reunion I was expecting, Ethan remarked, breaking the silence. Zoltrak's lips curled into a faint smile. It could have gone worse. Ethan raised an eyebrow. We were almost shot, chased by alien wolves, and ambushed by bounty hunters. I'd hate to see what worse looks like. Zoltrak chuckled softly but winced, clutching his side. Ethan's eyes narrowed. You sure you're all right? Zoltrak nodded, though his movements were sluggish. I will heal. The artifact. It drains me the longer I carry it. Now that it's in your possession, I feel lighter. Ethan pulled the crystalline artifact from his jacket, holding it up to the dim cabin lights. The blue core within shimmered faintly, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. I still don't get why this thing's worth dying over, Ethan said. It's just a rock. Zoltrak's gaze hardened. It is far more than that. The artifact is ancient, older than my people, older than yours. It contains energy that can reshape worlds, or destroy them. Ethan's grip on the artifact tightened slightly. And your sister wants to use it for what exactly? To claim the throne, Zoltrak replied grimly. She believes the artifact will give her power, enough to lead my people into war against the outer colonies. Ethan's eyes narrowed. And you don't? No, Zoltrak said firmly. Our people have suffered enough. The artifact should be hidden, forgotten. Ethan exhaled slowly, turning the crystal over in his hands. Well, if it's so dangerous, maybe I should toss it out the airlock. Zoltrak's eyes widened. Do not. Ethan smirked. Relax. I was kidding. Kind of. Zoltrak's gaze softened. I trust you, Ethan. More than most. Ethan tucked the artifact back into his jacket, meeting Zoltrak's gaze. That's dangerous. Trusting someone like me. Zoltrak's expression didn't waver. Perhaps. But I owe you my life, and by the laws of my people, I am bound to repay that debt. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, leaning back against the wall. You keep saying that. I didn't save you for some kind of life debt. I know, Zoltrak replied. But I swore it regardless. Ethan sighed. Look, if you really want to repay me, just don't die. That's payment enough. Zoltrak smiled faintly. A simple request. I will try to honor it. The dropship shuddered slightly as it began its descent toward a human outpost nestled along the edge of a dense alien forest. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. Landing in 2 minutes. Prep for disembark. Ethan glanced out the window. The outpost was small, barely more than a cluster of buildings surrounded by high walls and automated turrets, but it was safe, at least for now. As the dropship touched down, the hatch hissed open, and warm, humid air rushed into the cabin. Ethan stepped out first, scanning the perimeter. Soldiers in worn uniforms patrolled the area, but none paid him much attention. Zoltrak followed slowly, his movements still stiff. You sure you want to be walking around like that? Ethan asked. You look like you might collapse any second. Zoltrak waved him off. I will manage. Ethan led him toward a small medical tent at the far end of the outpost. Inside, a human medic glanced up from his desk, eyes widening slightly at the sight of Zoltrak. Didn't know we were bringing in aliens today, the medic said. He's with me, Ethan replied. Long story. The medic frowned but gestured to an empty cot. Lay down. I'll run a scan. Zoltrak sat carefully, exhaling slowly as the medic activated a handheld scanner. Ethan stood nearby, watching as the device flickered to life. His vitals are low, the medic muttered. Whatever he's been through, it took a toll. Zoltrak's eyes fluttered closed as exhaustion finally overtook him. He just needs rest, the medic said. Give him a few hours. Ethan nodded, stepping outside to let Zoltrak sleep. The outpost was quiet, save for the distant hum of machinery and the faint rustle of wind through the nearby trees. Ethan leaned against the railing, gazing up at the alien sky. He pulled the artifact from his jacket again, watching it glow faintly in his palm. Commander. Ethan turned to find the outpost's captain approaching, his expression stern. I was told you brought something unusual back with you, the captain said, nodding toward the artifact. Ethan tucked it away. Just a souvenir. The captain's gaze lingered on him for a long moment, but eventually nodded. Keep it that way. We've got enough problems without alien relics stirring things up. Ethan smirked. Trust me, I'm not looking for more trouble. As the captain walked away, Ethan's grip on the artifact tightened. But deep down, he knew trouble wasn't done with him yet. And neither was Zoltrak.